Arizona basketball is on a two-game losing streak, but it can all get right against Baylor. But there are going to be some major things that Arizona is going to have to fix.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. Your team every day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That simple, that easy. Okay, Arizona now going against the University of Baylor. Now, Arizona right now is in the middle of a two-game losing streak. That's obviously not good. And it just kind of shows you how things can go very, very quickly. In that Arizona was 11-1 at this time last week, and now you are looking at being 11-3 in conference. Now, Baylor is an interesting game for Arizona, as this is a game that Arizona absolutely needs to win. It's in Waco. It's an 8 o'clock. It's an 8 o'clock tip, so that's obviously a little bit less than ideal, but Baylor is an interesting team, though, because they went into the year with a massive expectations. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the need for a win in this, and we're also going to talk about Caleb Love, the difference between a 4 seed and a difference between a 3 or a 6, and all of that. But first, what do you need to know about Baylor? Well, Baylor's a team that you're without your big man, your center that's basically your one big height, Ojinawa. He's not there anymore. He tore his leg up, and he is not. He's out, and that is going to be a problem for Baylor because he is. He's a big part. He's a massive part in what they do, and without him, Arizona should be able to kind of beat them up front. I would certainly imagine that Arizona's going to be in good position on that one, because after that, you don't really have a ton of size. You got Jason Asamoto, but he's a freshman. He's not ready really for that. I also think that you get with a guy like Norchad Mir up front. He's really, really good, but he's also 6'7". Those aren't the guys generally that worry me if I'm Arizona. Is that generally the guys that worry me are the guys that you look at and you're kind of like, okay, that dude, he's really long, he's really lanky, he's really physical. Houston had a bunch of those guys, and obviously Arizona wasn't able to really deal with that. So that's an issue, obviously, for Arizona. But Norchad Mir, I feel very comfortable that Arizona is going to be able to deal with him. Because again, while Tobe Awaka and while Trey Townsend aren't really those dudes, I think we know that by now. Against really long length, against that, I think you're going to be fine. And Tobe Awaka, I think especially, will be more than good enough in this game. As a matter of fact, I think he's going to excel. Then you also got somebody in Henri Veesaar coming off the bench that there's nobody like that for Baylor. Henry's got to have a monster game for Arizona, and I think he will. Listen, against a team like Houston, where Henry's obviously still young, Henry's still trying to kind of figure it out, you got to be a little bit better. But at the same time, you've also got a guy, though, in Henry that I expect him to step up. He's not a finished product by any means, but he's very good, and he can be a shot blocker. He can do a lot of different things for the Wildcats. I look for him to have a very nice performance there. Now, the next one too that I think you look at and you're like, okay, where exactly is this going to stay? And I think the next one is going to be Carter Bryant. Carter Bryant's another one. You got to have a huge game in this. You've got to have a massive game, because he is the one dude on the team outside of Henri that can come in and can rebound, and he can get not only can he get rebounds, he can get a lot of different plays in there. He is again, he's far from a finished product, but Carter, you can just tell how good Carter is going to be. He is again, he's a good basketball player, and if he's not here next year, then I don't know that anybody should necessarily be surprised. But that's kind of, with Carter, that's a big that front court right there. They've got to win against they period, point blank. They've got to win their matchup. They've got to beat them up front. And if they beat them up front, then I think that, you start saying, okay, where are you if you're Arizona? And I think you're in a better spot. But if Arizona doesn't take advantage up front, then I think that you start saying, okay, well, you're going to have some bigger, you got some bigger issues in play here because you should be able to beat them up front. Then, because that's it is. That's where your size advantage. Now, in that first game, VJ Edgecombe, who is the precocious 5-star freshman who's going to be probably a top 5 pick, he didn't play that well until the very end. And, he's very, very good, but he wasn't somebody either that I think that Arizona was going to be that anybody was really going to be overwhelmed by. Again, he is a freshman. He's obviously very good, but he's also not somebody that's going to take over who's not going to take over the entire game. That's just not who he is at this point. At least you're hoping so. Then Jeremy Roach, this is the guy that came in obviously from Duke, a player that, he's good, but I don't think that they probably got exactly what they were hoping to get out of him. As a matter of fact, I think that it's probably been the exact opposite. You've heard about problems not necessarily bringing it all on the court, off the court, and that's something that you can't really have if you're a team like Baylor. I mean, you brought him in, you needed him to be that point guard, and you needed him to be the guy that was going to, put you in a position to be able to succeed. And that hasn't really been the case. I think you were hoping that he could be 15 points per game, something like that, but that definitely has not been the case at this point. But that can always change. Arizona in that matchup, though, is going to have an interesting matchup, though, because you're going to have someone in Jaden Bradley that's not playing well, and I think a big concern for me, if I'm Arizona, is Jaden Bradley being asked to do too much, and that's the question. I don't know that we know the answer to that, because he is he's really the only ball handler. And I think you worry about Bradley wearing down because you can't really have Bradley wearing down. You need to be able to have him playing at a really, really high level for Arizona. And he's been kind of the tip of the spear, as people would say. But what does that really mean then going forward? And I don't know that we really have an answer for that. We're going to find out, because Arizona has to win this game, period, point blank. And if they don't win this game, then I think you start looking, man, are you falling into that 6 or that 7 seed realm? Because that is definitely not something that you want. And this team got really, really hot. And not only did this team get really, really hot, you're also kind of at the spot too where you're like, okay, you don't want to allow this to slip away from you. And that's it's definitely something I think is in the cards for Arizona at this point. This is a must win, because you get this win, then I think you're also probably looking at being able to win 4 more games going forward, 3 more games going forward, because listen, I think you're going to be able to beat Utah, you're going to be able to beat ASU, and you're going to be able to beat BYU. Those BYU, Utah, and ASU, those games are all at home. Those are all games that Arizona should be able to win. So I think you're definitely hoping that you can win those ones if you're Arizona. But got to stick here now. There's going to be a real key to this game that I don't know is necessarily being talked enough, or maybe it's being talked about too much. But we're going to discuss Caleb Love and his impact for this game, because there's something too that I think that people really aren't necessarily talking enough about. But first, FanDuel. All right, here's the deal with FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in than at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. All right, with FanDuel, you can place the live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. That's simple. Now, here's the deal. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet can get $150. $150, my friends, in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. But just visit FanDuel.com to join. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment count with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And again, you got college basketball here as well. Get in on FanDuel right now. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now, Caleb Love. Caleb Love is going to have to be big in this game. There's no way around it. Now listen, I think we're kind of at the stage now with Caleb where you know that there's going to be some games where Caleb is just not going to play, where Caleb's just not going to shoot the ball well. We've seen a lot of those games. We've lived a lot of this. We've lived a lot of these games. But I think the next question is because I think that we are kind of at the point now where with the Wildcats, you're going to go as Caleb Love goes. Now, Caleb Love did not shoot well against Houston. As a matter of fact, it was one of the oddest games I've ever seen by a U of A basketball player in that he was 1 of 8 from the field. He was able to get to the and he had some terrible turnovers, but he was able to get to the free throw line, which was obviously a big thing. And he was able to make some really, really good assists. That is something that I think has been very, very reported about with Love, is that he has been making some nice assists. He's been making plays for other players, and that's something that he hasn't really done in the past, honestly. That's something that, and defensively, he's been really, really good. He's going to have to take that up on him again. You're going to probably be matched up with VJ Edgecombe in this game, and VJ Edgecombe, you got to be able to knock that one out. You got to be able to win that matchup. That's why you brought back. Again, you were an All-American last year. You haven't probably had that type of year yet, but you were brought in for reasons like that, to be able to get to the hoop, to be able to make differences, and to just be able to be a difference maker on this team. So if you got that, then I think you feel a little bit better about things. But Caleb Love's got to win that matchup against VJ Edgecombe. There's no doubt about it. It just is what it is. He's got to win that. He's got to win that matchup. And then KJ Lewis. Listen, KJ Lewis is kind of like this team in that he's a very good player. He's definitely flawed at certain levels, but he's also a really, really good basketball player. If he can get going, if he can make the plays that are necessary, and stick to his strengths, then these are the kind of games that you want from an Arizona perspective. He's a dude that's he's got talent, but a couple things, he's not a very good shooter, and he's got a loose handle. When he decides to just take 1, 2, 3 dribbles and get to the hoop, he's a very good passer. He makes very good decisions, but those are also kind of few and far between at that point. He's got to be able to just get downhill and do that. If he's just shooting threes or he's trying to dribble the ball too much, that's going to be an issue for Arizona, and that's going to be an issue for pretty much everybody involved. But it's going to be a big game for him as well. There's really no doubt about that one. Now, Anthony Del Orso, I could see this being an ADO game. ADO is Arizona's going to need ADO to be able to make some threes. Just the way it is. He's got to be able to make some threes in this game. And if he makes some threes, or he scores the basketball a little bit, he's going to be able to help out Arizona. But, you're going to need him. I thought he was fairly good against Houston. But he's got to be able to basically win those matchups and do what he's got to do. Against Houston, like I said, he was far from great, but he was somewhat good on the defensive end, got a couple steals, got a couple picks, and also made a three, got a reverse bucket. Like I said, he can do some solid things. So there's obviously that with ADO. Then I think at the front court, you've got, when I think you look at Trey Townsend, it is what it is. He's going to play 20 minutes and he's going to get 3 points and 2 rebounds. And this is a game though that I think you're hoping that he can be better in. He was fairly good against Baylor in that first game, and I think a big part of it is that Norchad Omier is just not that big. Norchad Omier is a smaller guy, and he doesn't have a lot of length. He's not a shot blocker. So that kind of plays into what Townsend does. The problem with Townsend, though, as we know, is that he just can't rebound. He just kind of stands there. I don't know if it's the instincts. I don't know if it's the not being long. I don't know if it's a combination of like 6 different things, but he just can't rebound. Awaka in this game is going to be able to rebound. And I think Awaka has to have a killer game. I think Awaka is the dude that I think you need to look at and have him say, all right, Tobe, you've got to be 12 and 12 and 13, 14 and 11, something like that. And that happens, then I think Arizona's in good shape. But Tobe's got to kill it, just like Henri Veesaar. Those are the two guys that have to kill it. And I think Carter Bryant, obviously at that small forward position, if he is able to chip in as well and score and get some assists, then and block shots, Arizona's going to be in good shape. I do think Arizona's going to win this game. I think Arizona's going to win this game by about 7 to 8 points. I think they're just better than Baylor. I've watched Baylor quite a few times this year, and I've just never come away that impressed. As a matter of fact, like in different ways, they kind of feel like a little bit poorer man's version of Arizona, in that you got talent, but it's at some points it feels a little dysfunctional, and you have no height now. That's what I keep coming back to in this game, is that you've got no height. And Arizona, like I said, with a Henri Veesaar, the new look sleek Henri Veesaar, you got to be able to have. I think that you got to be able to have some height that can make some plays, and that's I think gonna be the case. Now, a big part of this too is that if you're Arizona, you really need this win though, because you want to stay in a certain range as far as seeding goes for a very specific reason. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day, your team every day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now, Arizona, you don't listen. You look at those 2 lines, and none of those teams really worry, or none of those teams really terrify me. Your Tennessees, your Houstons. I mean, Houston's better than Arizona, but I'll take my chances against a team like, like I said, Tennessee. I'll take my chances there as well. The ones though that I don't want to play, if you get that far, I don't think you have any chance of beating Duke in the Sweet 16. I think that's a terrible matchup for Arizona, and I don't think that they will ever win that game. Auburn, like I said, don't love that matchup as well. Think that that's something that's probably not ideal for Arizona, but you want to avoid those kind of games as long as possible. If you're a 3 seed, then you get in the Sweet 16, you would get one of those 2 seeds. And, like I said, with those games, it's game on for me at that point. I'll take my chances against any of those teams, or like a Michigan State, or, a St. John's. Even though Rick Pitino terrifies me in the NCAA tournament, I'll still take my chances against any of those teams. But what I will be worried about, though, is if you play, there are some teams that I think you have next to no chance of beating, and that's just the way it is. So, you got to win this game. If you win this game, like I said, then I think you can start realistically looking at and saying, okay, can you be at 15-3 or 15-5 bare minimum in conference? And I think you can, because you win that, then you got 3 other games that you should win. And then maybe you split one of those Iowa State / Kansas games. I think the Kansas game is far more likely than Iowa State, just because I don't think Kansas is that good. But that's kind of what you start looking at, and we'll find out. But Arizona's done a lot of good things this year. Kansas State and Houston, those were very, very winnable games that Arizona basically just kind of let slip through the cracks, and you can't really do that. You got to be able to get, 4 minutes. You got to be able to get, got to be able to get those wins. And at that 4 minute mark, Arizona has got to close out halves, and they did not do that at all against Houston. In that Houston basically just pushed them around in those last 4 minutes, and Arizona just wasn't good enough in that spot. If you don't do that, you're not going to win games. I mean, it's kind of that old cliche that that's where you decide where Arizona. That's where you decide as a team, are you going to win that game or not? Because that's where you can steal points. That's where you can steal buckets. That's where you can steal a lot of different things. So we will see how that does play out. But looking around the rest of the Big 12, this is Houston's conference to lose again. They are the best team in the conference. I came away from that game thinking that that's a Final Four team. They're tough, they're physical, and they're an interesting combination too because they are not. You don't have a ton of like 5-star talent, but they're all 23, 24 years old, and they all play exactly into what Kelvin Sampson wants to do. That's just a well-oiled machine. Now, they could come into some problems because offensively, they can't really score. But defensively, they're an absolute monstrosity. And from a rebounding defensive perspective, that's going to keep them in about every single game against every single team that they play. I think it does hurt them a little bit that they don't have a Jamal Shed like they did last year. Jamal Shed was huge for them in that he put everything into play. Milos Uzan, I must say, is better than I thought he was. Him and Cryer aren't bad, but Arizona, in my opinion, should be able to beat about any team in the conference outside of Houston on a neutral court. Houston, I think, is just a little bit better than Arizona. I think Iowa State's probably also just a little bit better than Arizona, but that's like I said, I don't look at Iowa State as unbeatable. On a neutral court, I have a hard time seeing Arizona beating Houston. I just don't think they're wired to do that. But back to Baylor, though, one thing at a time. Baylor can still beat Arizona, and if Baylor were to beat Arizona, then you're 11-4 in conference, and you start saying probably best case scenario you're going to be 15-5 in the Big 12, and 16-4 is a lot different than 15-5 just from a spreadsheet perspective. And that's where, if you're Arizona, you got to be able to get this W. And I think they will. Like I said, that's what I'm going to go with. If we're sitting here tomorrow talking about Arizona getting a win, then I think that you're looking very much possibly at that 3 seed. Now, when you're a 3 seed, you can obviously get shipped out anywhere, which isn't necessarily ideal. But at the same time, you can. It's still not the worst thing in the world. Whereas if you're a 4 seed, you're probably going to be getting like a Duke in the East in the Sweet 16. You don't want that. You want to put that off as long as possible. But Arizona is also a team that can win 3 or 4 games in the NCAA tournament. They're also a team as well that can lose in the round of 32 or in the or in that first round to a team that is particularly deep or talented. Arizona is a team that's good, but they don't have a tremendous margin for error. I think next year you're hoping that you have a lineup where you can get Carter Bryant back, where you've got a Braden Burries, possibly a Jaden Bradley, a Henri Veesaar, hopefully a Koa Pete, something like that. And I think things start looking a little bit better for you from that perspective. You got a little bit more margin for error that you just don't have this year. But in the Big 12, the Big 12 is an absolute gauntlet. Not really breaking any news here. The Big 12 there really aren't any easy games. This isn't like we were in the Pac-12, like we talked about, where you had a Stanford or you had a Cal or you had a Washington State or you had an Oregon State or anything like that. These games are totally different. And you're playing in hostile environments. Against Baylor, that's going to be the case as well. You're going to be playing in a hostile environment. It's not going to be like Houston or Iowa State, but you're still going to have people there, and they're going to know that this is going to be a must-win game for their squad. And again, this is a team that still has a lot of talent and guys that didn't play in that first game, like a Love, like a Celestine. But the big man is out, and that certainly helps Arizona. So again, I'm going to go Arizona 81, Baylor 73. And I think that the big difference is going to be the front court for the U of A, and that I think that Henri Veesaar is going to be an absolute problem, and I think that Tobe Awaka is also going to be a beast. This is the kind of game that they need to eat. This is the kind of game that they need to be able to live, and I think they're going to do just that. And hopefully, we're talking in the post game show tomorrow about how Arizona has now moved to, how Arizona has now moved to 12-3 in conference play, and we can start saying, man, can you become 15-3? Can you keep pushing that? Because if you can keep pushing that, then you start looking at that 2 or 3 seed, which is just a massive, massive deal. But as always, though, very, very much appreciate you all making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day, your team every day. Locked On. I'm your host, Mike Luke. We'll be back with you on the post-game show. Again, Arizona 81, Baylor 73. That's my prediction. We'll talk to you later tonight.